Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Baldwin, and I am the founder of Vertisys and a partner at TJS Deemer Dana. Vertisys has been providing IT services to businesses of all sizes for 29 years. This morning, we're going to explore the exciting topic of password management and passwords in general. I hope my presentation is educational. There's definitely a lot of information in here I have to share with you over the next 45 minutes. Assisting me this morning is Brittany Weingartner. She will be manning the Q&A. If you submit any questions, we'll be sure to reply back to you within 24 hours. Additionally, we have a couple of polls that we'll be submitting throughout the presentation. There's 3 polls. It's just some simple questions that are applicable to the slides during the presentation. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. If any of you have seen my previous webinars, I typically like to offer historical context on the subject matter. The last seminar that I did was in 2020, and so we talked about the worst year in history, which was kind of an interesting little fact. So let's talk a little bit about password origins. A password, or in Roman times, watchword, was a phrase given to sentinels to distinguish friend from enemy. As you approach that sentinel, you would be requested to give that watchword. So in the Roman army, a watchword was used at night, and it consisted of a word or phrase that someone must say to prove that he was a bona fide member of the Roman unit. Or if the authorized watchword was not used, he was considered an enemy. The daily watchword was not communicated verbally. One soldier was chosen out of each squadron that were quartered at the extremity of the lines, the Roman army lines, furthest from the headquarters, or what the Romans called the Principia. Each of these individuals was what the Roman called a tesserarius. He visited a tent at the tribune each evening around sunset and received a wooden tablet covered in wax. This was called a tessera, on which the password was inscribed along with a number correlating to the squadron for each line. Upon receiving the tessera, that soldier returned to his unit to which he belonged, delivered it to the commanding officer. It was then passed to the next adjoining unit, or what the Romans called a maniple, to the next and to the next, as it was passed along the whole line. Then it was returned by the person who received it last to the tribune. Just imagine a hub and spoke whereby the tessera would begin being passed inward from the furthest end of the spoke until it reached the Principia. Each line of units had its own tessera passed each evening. The regulation was that each of the tesserae should be returned before it was dark, and if one was found missing by the appointed time, the row to which it belonged could be quickly discovered by referring to the squadron number or mark at the top. And so an investigation took place as to the cause of the delay, and punishment was inflicted upon the parties found to be at fault. Now, under Roman Empire, it was the function of the prince to create the daily watchword. Occasionally, the emperor would define the watchword for the palace, and it was distributed in like fashion. An interesting fun fact is that Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, who we know as Caligula, was killed by his praetorians after delivering the watchword Jupiter to his tesserarius. So kind of an interesting story. Obviously, the tessera is the equivalent of today's sticky notes that we all stick to our monitors. So let's talk about the agenda for today's webinar. Password ABCs. We're going to talk some password facts, habits, strength, and how quickly those passwords can be broken. how do bad guys get your passwords? And then we're going to talk a little bit about password managers, the anatomy of a good password manager, how a password manager can help you, some reputable password managers, and some things that you can do beyond passwords. So we'll talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication or 2FA, how they can help. We'll have a little summary at the end. So let's get cracking. So I did a lot of research, obviously, for this presentation. There's some startling facts. 60% of people use the same password everywhere. That means that I will use the same password typically for my Bank of America banking website as I do for my Lowe's login, or potentially for my Visa credit card. So that's a startling fact. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that's not good. Clearly, nobody wants to remember a password for every site, which is the reason for this webinar. We're going to talk about some great ways to help with that. 90% of passwords can be cracked in less than 6 hours. And I'm going to demonstrate that as well. But with technology as it is today, there are computers designed with the sole function of getting hashes, using password dictionaries, and attempting to crack passwords. And we're talking billions of passwords a second. So there's some really powerful machines out there and some pretty bad guys. We're also going to demonstrate, what's driving this. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. 18% of employees share their passwords with others. 49% of employees only change one digit or add a character to the end of their password when they're required to update it. And of course, compromised passwords are responsible for 81% of hacking-related breaches. 48% of workers use the same passwords in both their personal and work accounts. And just like I said at the very beginning, about 60% using the same password everywhere. So obviously, the same passwords that you're using at work, you're probably using for your personal accounts. And the big number is that right now there's about 550 million credentials floating around out there in underground hacking forums, which is almost a 30% increase from 2020. So even though we're all taking using better password habits, making our passwords longer or making them more complex, we're still having an increase of breaches where information is being stolen. So let's talk about the top 10 most common passwords of 2021. And these are great. And these are going to be exactly what you think. And I know it's unbelievable, but this is actually information corroborated from many sources. So number 10, 123, 123. Obviously a bunch of numerics, numeric digits. Number 8 is I love you, followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to add a couple more digits to that as we approach the number 1 most commonly used password, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I really don't have anything else to say about that, but I've never used any one of these passwords, but clearly there are a lot of people that do because they're easy to remember. So let's talk about how quickly a threat actor can actually hack or brute force hack these kinds of passwords. I found this nifty little matrix that further supports how quickly the computers of today can crack those passwords. Note how increasing the number of characters exponentially increases the amount of time that it takes. So our previous slide where we talked about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's a 6-character password with numbers only. Obviously, it can just be broken instantly, all the way up to 10 characters. But if you add numbers and change your case and add some symbols to it, that same 6-character password takes a whopping 5 seconds to break. So you can clearly see that the longer your password, the more secure it is. We'll also talk a little bit more later about how there is not necessarily a correlation between adding those special characters or changing the case of that password, that there are some other things that you can do with passwords that will exponentially increase the time that it can be cracked. So where do folks store their passwords? 37% of us commit those passwords to memory. About 12% use password management. Use a web browser, Chrome, Firefox, Safari to save those passwords. The bottom four here are what we're going to try to get away from. But a physical notebook or a note app, sticky note, or other, obviously not encrypted, not saved anywhere. Should something happen to that physical notebook or that notepad, sticky note, or other, obviously they're not encrypted. Anybody can get their hands on that. So one of our poll questions is coming up. Feel free to respond there. And an average employee has to remember 27 passwords. I've seen some different numbers here and there. This seems to be the most common. I believe it. I looked in my password manager that I use. I actually have about 541 sources where I've saved my passwords. Great. So everybody uses a combination of Excel spreadsheets, sticky notes, and saving it in Google. Wonderful. Okay, well, that's good. So let's move on. We talk about locations and where we're saving our passwords. We noticed that some folks on this webinar are saving to a browser. Just want to work through that a little bit. Just remember, not all browsers will encrypt your passwords, so they're pretty easy to get to. That means that they're in what we call clear text. The only browser that really offers extra protection is Firefox. It will allow you to create a master password for that you have to enter when you need the data or to decrypt that data for autofill. The problem with Firefox is that that option is disabled by default. So you have to go in there and enable it and then establish that master password. Obviously, if you switch between browsers, you're using a desktop, you're using a tablet, maybe you have a smartphone. Sometimes you have to use Chrome or a different browser to perform different functions. It's just a lot more difficult to manage your passwords. Also increases the risk of having inaccurate information when you switch between those platforms. So what are the most popular sources? How do hackers get your passwords, and what are the most popular sources of what we call data exfiltration? Obviously, we read about it in the news every single day, is that data breach. Anytime there is a major data breach, the information is bought and sold on the dark web marketplaces. According to Shape Security, about 90% of login attempts at online retailers are from this type of attack. And this method is effective for hackers about 3% of the time. This is a list of hacks from just this year. Ubiquiti is actually a network equipment company. They sell switches and firewalls. Undisclosed number of names were stolen. Facebook, this was the big one. 214 million people had their information exposed, what we call personal identifiable information, or PII. Both Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. This was in January of this year. US Cellular, they're the fourth largest carrier in the United States. 4.9 million customers had their data exposed. Even government sites. So you look at the California DMV in February, the last 20 months of vehicle registration records were exposed. That's some pretty personal information. And then, of course, in March, Microsoft announced a vulnerability with their mail servers where 30,000 organizations had their information exposed. So this is still happening. 2021, information is being exposed every day. So anything that we can do can mitigate those risks. And obviously, in April of this year, 533 million users from 106 countries had their names, phones, emails, and bios exposed. So lots of big numbers. Another way that these threat actors are gaining information is brute force. These are just automated guesses, billions of passwords a minute until the correct one is found. So there are bots, there are applications that are constantly trying to log in to any number of websites, Microsoft being the biggest target for Microsoft Office 365. But these attempts are being made by brute force attacks. Social engineering, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but effectively sending you an email, posing as someone that you may know, asking for information from you to gain access to your information. Some interesting techniques are used there, and we'll demonstrate that. Just regular stealing passwords and ransomware, and I define that's a kind of a big component. So stealing passwords in handwritten passwords that are stuck to your monitor. Also, when we talk about ransomware, typically think about a machine that has a piece of malware installed. It in its inception, it was designed to encrypt all of the data on your computer or on your network, and then obviously hold you ransom for a number of Bitcoins. And the thing is that all of the new ransomware that's actually being designed is actually downloading that information before it encrypts it. So that information is getting exposed and sold in that dark web marketplace as well. Shoulder surfing, this is old school, but still happens. Observing someone as they type their password. A lot of folks use video surveillance to capture information. You're sitting at a Starbucks, you enter a password, sitting in any kind of a public location, and you're on your computer. There could be people watching as you manually type that password into your computer. So talk about some ways that that can prevent that from happening. And then, of course, leaked passwords. And we're going to talk a little bit about these leaked passwords, but effectively what that means is these threat actors compile lists of passwords and spread these across forums on the dark web. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, and how they're used. But suffice it to say, with a really, a couple of mouse clicks, I can get lists of thousands of passwords, and I've got some information to share about that as well. So, so this graph is well, there's good news and bad news, right? So the blue line is the number of breaches in the last few years, and so that in the year 2020, there were about 1,000 publicly announced data breaches, and that's from these Fortune 1000 companies, which is 1,600 less than in the year 2017. But we're still 156 million records were exposed in those breaches. So there's just a lot of information that's being exposed during these data breaches. I found this great website. It's the Dark Web Price Index 2020. Just so you wanted to know, if you ever wanted to get a credit card with a $5,000 balance for the low price of $20. You can get that card details, which includes all the information on the credit card, and obviously that card will have a minimum of a $5,000 balance. Things like PayPal accounts, driver's license for $70, a hacked Facebook account, believe it or not, $74. And then really one of the most telling ones here is actually the bottom one. And that is you can pay someone about $900 and they will hack into a computer network that has a minimum of 1,000 PCs, and they will extract information from 70% of those devices. Now, obviously, there's no guarantee with this because this is sold in the black market, but this is a market that exists, and there is an actual index. A number of folks keep track of how much it costs to gain this information. So if you ever thought about getting into that business, here you go. Here's how much money you can make. So let's talk a little bit more about how these threat actors are getting information. Phishing, for instance. It's a practice of sending emails purporting to be from a reputable company to induce an individual to reveal personal information, such as passwords or credit card numbers. And there's 5 common types of phishing. You have your regular, what we call email phishing. This is where a scammer will create an email that impersonates a legitimate company and attempts to steal information. It's really generic email. I'm sure all of you have received this type of email. One of them that was pretty popular was a PayPal email that went out. And it wasn't personalized. It was just asking you to, it would say something like, hey, we think that your information has needs to be updated. And it will prompt you, it'll put a hyperlink asking you to update your identity and any other pieces of information. Very generic. You have spear phishing, which is much more personal. It will have a salutation that will have your name in it. For example, you may get something from your boss asking you to go buy some iTunes gift cards, scratch off the activation number on the back, send a picture, send it to them. I actually know a lot of clients who have fallen for that spear phishing, in as recently as the last couple of months, as a matter of fact. So they're very convincing. And if you're not on your toes, it's easy to fall for it. You have something called clone phishing, and that's where they replicate an email that you've already received. But what they do is they might change, they have an attachment on there or a dangerous link to harvest credentials. It's the most difficult to detect, and I'm gonna actually have an example of it on the next slide, which is kind of interesting. We have whaling, and that's, we're just looking for high-ranking executives, specifically targets those executives to gain access to maybe sensitive company information or gain access to company funds. And pop-up phishing, which is, these are pop-ups that may actually come up on your computer, and they'll typically inform you that malware has been found, and that you need to download a removal tool. And I actually know a number of people that have fallen for this as well. So pretty sneaky stuff. Again, using good malware protection, good endpoint protection products can help with the pop-up phishing. So as an example, I wanted to show you an email that I found from SunTrust. And I've highlighted a couple of places here. You can see everything looks accurate here. There's no misspellings. But when you take a look at who it was actually from at the top, you can see, actually, let me show you here. So in this particular area, you can see that the word SunTrust is misspelled. So this scammer has actually registered the domain Suntust, CUNTUST.com, and they're sending emails from that domain. And they're asking you to visit this website, and you can't really see, but if I were to hover over this link in the email, it would show me that it's going to a site other than suntrust.com. But this is a really good clone phishing scam. They would typically, the landing page that this points to looks just like a SunTrust website. And what would happen is it would ask you to put in your username, enter your password, and then nothing would happen. And then you would keep entering it. And then you would realize, oh my gosh, I'm at the wrong website. And they have just harvested your credentials. So pretty sneaky stuff. This is happening all day, every day. If you have ever seen this pop-up box on your computer, you're probably having a pretty bad day. There are many different versions of this, but basically what you would see this pop up after the data on your computer or network have been completely encrypted. And then you basically go buy Bitcoin. It actually gives you instructions on exactly how to purchase the Bitcoin and transfer that and where to send it. And $300 is actually pretty cheap. This is an old one, but anyway, this is bad news. This is a pretty bad day. I mentioned it a little earlier, but half of the ransomware attacks in 2021 actually steal the data before they encrypt the systems. So it's no longer about business continuity or disaster recovery response. So typically if we have had a couple of clients that have had ransomware, we typically just restore the server from a backup. And minimal downtime, just maybe a few hours for 1 or 2 servers, we restore from a backup. The problem is that today it's more than just restoring from a backup. It's more of what we call an incident response because information has been stolen. So that brings about all kinds of other business-related issues, informing your clients and determining what information was stolen and how it's going to be used. Also, the average cost of remediating that ransomware attack is $761,000. That includes, obviously, the payout to the hackers. It includes hiring a company or a CERT team to come in to determine and do all the forensics to determine how it happened. So very expensive. So just a few weeks ago, it was obviously, I think that we have a poll right here too, Brittany. There we go. If everybody can just reply to that, that'd be great. So this month, what seems to be the largest password collection of all time was leaked on a popular hacker forum. The user of the forum posted a 100 gig text file that it contained 8.4 billion entries of passwords, which presumably have been combined from a previous data leak from previous breaches. So what's happening is, okay, thank you for replying, everyone. What's happening is these very large files become part of a data dictionary that's used by these threat actors to brute force password attempts. So obviously, this is a lot of information. The author supposedly mentions that within this 100 gig file, there is a list of 6 to 20 character passwords. By combining the 8.4 billion unique password variations with other breach compilations that include usernames and email addresses, the threat actors can mount a password dictionary, what they call password spraying attacks against all kinds of online accounts. This is just a screenshot here of what that text file looks like. Obviously, 8.4 billion lines of code within that single file. A lot of information. But just know that this information is being released, it's being sold, it's being distributed all over the place. So one interesting website that I found was, and we're going to take a little field trip here, was developed by a guy named David Lowe Wheeler. He works with Dropbox. And what he found is that when you register for a website, a lot of times, and you may see this, is that there is, when you register for a website, you create a username and it asks you to present a password. And a lot of times you'll see on the screen where it shows you what that password strength is. And there was really no consistency between the way all of these websites determine the strength of a password. So this gentleman developed a much better way to simulate how threat actors would actually attempt to break your password. So for instance, like on Dropbox, they are using this tool, which is ZXCVBN. If you look on the bottom of your keyboard, you'll figure out how he named that. And so I just wanted to demonstrate very quickly how these threat actors use what we call dictionaries to figure out your password. So I took some information from one of my employees here at Vertisys, and yeah, she has the last name of Sanders. And what you're seeing here, let me get my pointer. Okay, so what you're seeing here is simple last name. It's using, what we're doing is we're matching the sequence in the password to a dictionary called surnames. And as we start entering other information into this password, for instance, like if we add a couple of digits to it, numeric digits to it, you can see that it's combining both the surname dictionary with what we call a pattern or a sequence. So, 0, 1 is very predictable. Most people will put a 1 and then they'll increment that to a 2. So it's super predictable. So he combines that together to figure out that a good offline attack of about 10,000 attempts a second can break that password in 2 seconds, which you see right here. We have really 2 types of attacks. We have what we call online attacks and we have offline attacks. And that online is what's known as that brute force attack. We're not going to get too deep in the weeds, but what I'm trying to show you is how password length and is much more important than complexity. So for instance, a lot of folks will think they're sneaky and they'll replace that A with maybe an @ symbol. And you can see that it does increase the length that it takes, but only by a very small amount. So for instance, an offline attack, it takes about 4 seconds if I add that @ symbol. Now watch what happens when I put the A back in. So it's about 2 seconds. Now, pay attention to this. So what if I put a space in? If you notice, it goes from 10 in that offline attack, 2 seconds. I put that space in, it goes to 29 seconds. And then if I put an unrelated word in there, for instance, like the word steak, right? Now we're talking, for that 10K offline attack, we're talking two days. And if I add another space and put an unrelated word, we're talking centuries to break that. Now, that bottom offline attack, fast hash, many cores, this area right here, that is a pretty powerful machine that can submit 10 billion attempts per second. That's a pretty powerful machine. Folks that have that type of technology really want to get your information. But what's more important and more telling about this is how these threat actors are breaking up password attempts into different dictionaries. So you can see now that we have a surname dictionary of Sanders. We've got a brute force attempt with 01. We've got a dictionary name called US TV and Film with the word steak, and then an additional brute force word of palm. Palm typically doesn't show up in that top dictionary of predictable terms. So anyway, it's kind of interesting. This link is in the presentation, and you're certainly welcome. It's a safe site to go to, by the way. Certainly, if you want to test your password against this and see how long it would take to crack it, feel free to do that. Talked a little bit about post-it notes when we were talking about the tessera, how folks are saving their passwords. I found this little slide and speaks for itself. I can tell you that in my 30 years of IT work, I have seen my fair share of sticky notes attached to monitors for sure. So how can you implement the best practices for passwords? We got another poll here. Use a password manager. We're going to demonstrate a little bit about how password managers work. What is it? It's a program that allows the user to store, generate, and manage passwords for local applications and online services. Password manager. Okay, good. 17% of us are using them. That's fantastic. Password manager assists in generating and retrieving complex passwords and storing those passwords in an encrypted database. So let's jump right into that. What's the anatomy of a good password manager? Obviously, you don't have to memorize all your passwords anymore. You only need to remember a master password that unlocks your password vault. They can auto-generate highly secure passwords for you, and you can determine the length of that password. Those random passwords are long, alpha, complex passwords that are almost impossible to guess. Most password managers include some type of dark web monitoring in which they will alert you if your passwords are being used elsewhere. In other words, it will monitor and look to see if your password is showing up in one of those dictionaries that I showed you earlier. If you're using a browser-based password manager, it won't even let you auto-complete or auto-generate a username and password if it recognizes a website is tied to using that password. So pretty interesting. I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute. Something that's actually kind of interesting most people don't think about is what we call digital inheritance. They can help your beneficiaries if you pass away. This is called digital inheritance, and in the event of your death, your family or whoever you designate to administer your estate can gain access to your password vault. So when you set up your account using the product, you can define who that beneficiary is and how to contact them, and only that person can gain access to your digital vault. Obviously, they save time. I'm going to demonstrate that as well. They work on all devices. So, obviously, if you have a Windows machine at work and you have a Mac at home and you've got a tablet and you've got a smartphone, you can gain access to all your password information, all using that same master password. Many password managers autofill your credentials for faster access to your accounts. They'll fill in your address, phone numbers, and so forth. Password managers do help protect your identity by using a unique password for every site. You're essentially segmenting your data across each website and application you use. If a criminal hacks one of your accounts, they won't necessarily be able to get into any of the others. Of course, that's not foolproof, but it's an additional layer of security that you'll certainly appreciate in the aftermath. And then obviously each password manager does have a personal version or a family version or a business version, so you can share those passwords as necessary between teammates or with your family. Again, they can store payment methods as well. So what are some reputable password managers? KeePass is one, 1Password, LastPass, NordPass, Bitwarden, and Dashlane are some of the top ones that are out there. There are a number of other reputable password managers. They're all good. They all share those common elements that we talked about earlier. So let me just, demonstrate exactly how these things work. Recently I had to change my Craigslist password. So I took some screenshots of that. So typically you go into Craigslist, they're asking you to enter your old password and then a new password. Here, my password manager that I use is called Dashlane. It is entering my existing password for me. And then you'll see when I tabbed into the new password field, it's auto-generating a password for me. And I can click, let me get my annotation tool back out again. So when I tab into this new password field, it's going to auto-generate. I can click the picture of the eyeball here to see what it looks like. And then when it will auto-fill my the retyping of my new password. And then it's smart enough to look to see, okay, you're changing your password for this person, and here's the new password, and now I can just click replace. It is going to update and replace the password in my Dashlane database, which is then replicated to the cloud, which is then replicated to all of my other devices. So pretty good stuff. Some of the other tools that are great, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, was the breach, dark web scans, and so forth. I ran it against one of my many aliases that I have, this Matt Baldwin USA fellow. It was found that the passwords, emails, and usernames were stolen back in 2019 from Zynga, which is a game developer. So it would then push me out to the Zynga website to change my password just as a precaution. One of the other things that's kind of neat is that many websites don't have that same password change process. So sometimes you have to do it manually. In this case, there's a password generator built right into right into the web app. It's built into my browser. It will generate a password of any length. I can just use this little slide bar. I can tell it to use letters, digits, symbols, similar characters, and so forth. So I can define that, and then it's a matter of just clicking the little copy button and pasting it into the new password window. So one more thing to talk about. We have all of our passwords. We're unique passwords on each website. We have complex, really long passwords. What's this next step into securing my information? Multi-factor authentication, or what we call 2FA. Many of you are already using it. You may have a fob. You may have an application that runs on your phone, Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator. It's basically just an electronic authentication method where you're granted access to an application after presenting 2 or more pieces of information. Something you know, like a password, plus something that you have, like a fob or a smartphone, and then something you are, which is like biometrics, like your thumbprint. This step comes after you enter that password. So why is it so important? Well, I think we've demonstrated passwords can be compromised. And hackers are probing more than 20 million Microsoft accounts every single day. So Office 365, we are on a campaign right now to convince all of our clients to turn on 2FA for all Office 365 users. It's a simple process, but even if your password has been had, they cannot get into your account. And of course, 81% of security breaches are due to weak or stolen passwords. I think we've demonstrated that as well. I added this because 77% of mobile devices today have biometric security. So you're biometric security is a type of multi-factor authentication. So if you haven't turned it on your smartphone, turn it on. Use that as, when you log into Venmo or Cash App or PayPal or any of these applications on your phones, use the biometric security. It's great stuff. I have just a quick video that I wanted to present. It talks a little bit more about how 2FA works. So I'm going to go ahead and play that because we're getting short on time here.
You might think your password is a tough wall to crack when it comes to your apps and identity, but passwords are a pretty laughable method of authentication. Whether from sheer brute force or simple phishing, scammers can scoop them up pretty easily. What you really need is a second way to verify yourself. That's why many internet services, a number of which have felt the pinch of being hacked, offer two-factor authentication. It's sometimes called 2FA or two-step and verification. But what exactly is two-factor authentication? There are three generally recognized factors for authentication. Something you know, such as a password, something you have, such as a hardware token or cell phone, and something you are, such as your fingerprint. Two-factor means the system is using two of these options. In most cases, the extra authentication is simply a numeric code, a few digits sent to your phone, which can only be used once. You can get that code via text message or a specialized smartphone app called an authenticator. Once linked to your accounts, the app displays a constantly rotating set of codes you can use whenever needed. The arguable leader in this area is Google Authenticator, which is free on Android and iOS. Other authenticators include Duo Mobile, SassPass, and LastPass Authenticator, which all do the same thing on mobile and some desktop platforms, while the majority of popular password managers all have 2FA by default. You can also go to twofactorauth.org to find a list of services that support 2FA. As you panic over how hard this all sounds, remember this: being secure isn't easy. The bad guys count on you being lax in protecting yourself in order to grab your information. Implementing 2FA means it takes a little longer to log in each time on a new device, but it's worth it in the long run to avoid some serious theft, be it of your identity, data, or money.
Thank you, PC Magazine. I thought that was a pretty effective demonstration of how 2FA works. And with that, we'll just have a quick summary. So we know password length is more important than complexity. Complexity is still important. Unique passwords across all websites. Where not to store passwords. Sticky notes. Where do the hackers get your passwords and how they're used. Some information about password managers and the best way to manage your credentials. And we talked about multi-factor authentication. And of course, it's the next step in securing information. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Again, any questions submitted on Q&A, we will reply back to you by tomorrow at the latest. Also, you'll be getting a live recording of the presentation by tomorrow as well. I appreciate your time and have a great afternoon.